my hope for Shasta County is that the story of our community and its grit and grace and beauty and suffering is able to be shared, because I think it's both honest and inspirational. There's this kind of salt of the earth reality to Shasta County. There's this grit to us as a county that I love and that I hope we forever hang on to.
Welcome to the City Builders Podcast, brought to you by the Reading Chamber of Commerce. I'm Todd Jones, President and CEO. In each episode, we bring you insights from local business leaders, tackle important issues, and explore what's shaping the future of Reading. Whether you're a business owner or just interested in our community's growth, this podcast is something for you. Thanks for joining us. This is City Builders. The City Builders Podcast is brought to you by Obsidian IT. Obsidian IT is a Reading-based, employee-owned technology company providing simple, scalable, outsourced IT for your business. Discover how Obsidian cares about IT and give them a call at 530-242-6000 or obsidianit.com. Obsidian keeps us running at the Chamber, and we could not do business without them. All right, everybody, welcome to the City Builders Podcast. I am here today with the CEO of Arch Collaborative, Kimberly Johnson, and we're going to talk about a lot of things, kind of the history of the Children's Legacy Center, the legacy of One Safe Place, where they're at now with Arch Collaborative, what some of the challenges are that they see, and where Arch Collaborative is going. So it's going to be a great conversation. I'm really looking forward to it, and thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm really happy to be here. Thanks, Todd.
Tell us about how you got into the nonprofit work that you're doing now. What was that origin story of starting Children's Legacy Center? What were you doing before you started it, and how did that idea come about? How did you start thinking about Shasta County has an issue, the North State has an issue, and I think there's something that I can do, you can do to help solve that problem?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I sort of stumbled into it. I would love to say that there was some kind of intentional pathway that I carved out and somehow manifested into my life. And that was very much not the reality. It was sort of like a newborn baby giraffe that was like falling into finding my footing into the nonprofit space. And so I really fell in love with nonprofit work when I started doing some work with my kid's dad, with Bobby, in San Francisco, and just really loved the idea of being a part of something that was bigger than myself. And so the very fast version ended up doing a lot of international work in, early 2010s. And at the time, human trafficking was an issue that was really kind of heavy on my heart and was sort of somewhat unknown, but kind of up and coming. And there was some kind of growing momentum, I think, in the States about the fact that human trafficking was a thing. But it was always very out there. It was something that was happening overseas. And so we went out there and did a lot of work in Cambodia, Southeast Asia, some in mainland China, as well as South Africa. And a part of that was there was a couple of disconnects that I was able to see. And one of them was you had a whole bunch of people in the States that were really passionate about this work and wanted to go do it on the ground. And then you would actually go on the ground, and what you found was the staff were burnt out and exhausted and just really needed a lot of support. And then the other piece was really the over-reliance on donor dollars that, orphanages and rescue recovery centers had specific to donations were the only way that they were surviving and sustaining. And so it kind of got in this space where I started doing some trainings, learned everything that I could about human trafficking, and started doing some trainings here locally to help send people to go either start organizations or serve and volunteer in organizations overseas. And then started kind of getting more into the sustainability space. And so that was everything from microloans to a large aquaponics system at an orphanage in Cambodia, and just really tried to understand how to problem solve with the resources that they had available to them in sometimes third world countries, which was fascinating. But how that bridged here locally to Reading and to Shasta County was I actually went to my orthodontist appointment. I had a trip that was back and went to my orthodontist appointment, and he, your mouth is open. So you're sort of at like the will of whatever he's going to be talking about.
And they want to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, and they try to ask you questions. And somehow they can understand, which is a little weird. Like, I don't know how you understand me,
like
but they can. It's like
understanding a toddler. I get it.
And they can. And they can. And so he was telling me this experience of going to the grocery store just the day before, and he was looking at, there was an infant that was sitting in a car seat that was in front of him. And for whatever reason, he looked at this baby and he thought to himself, if no one fights for this child, they don't have a chance in life. And for some reason, when he said that, it struck inside of me to go, gosh, we're doing all of this work overseas, which is really beautiful and meaningful. And I think it was right at the time. But it started to get me into the exploration of what can we do at home and how can we help in our backyard.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So when you started to focus your attention to locally here in the North State, did you see the gaps like quickly? Did you understand? Was there anyone kind of focusing on, human trafficking specifically, and children health and all these things that you're working in now? Did you see anyone in that space, or how did you kind of identify what the gap was?
Yeah, not at all. I didn't have the perspective to be able to see that. I wasn't at a 50,000 foot, 20,000 foot vantage point where I could see all of those parts. However, I knew that there was some degree of human trafficking that was happening in America. And there was a book, I think it was called Sex Trafficking by Siddharth Kara, that I read, and it talked about human trafficking in America. And so that kind of led me to doing some volunteer work at our local juvenile rehabilitative facility here in Shasta County. And I met an incredible probation officer there who kind of got my foot in the door a little bit with some local efforts. And one thing led to another. And in March of 2016, I was invited to come and attend our local, what's called our Sexual Assault Response Team, our SART team. So it's really all of the agencies that are around the table anytime there's an assault that happens. You have law enforcement, the DA's office, and child welfare. And of course, One Safe Place was there. Mm-hmm. Which is very full circle now, yeah. And then the medical community, of course, and so I sort of joke that I kind of snuck in the back of the room, and you're really only supposed to be in those meetings if you have an MOU with everyone, which I did not. So they had to change the meeting around so then that way I could leave. It was very awkward, and but there was one item on the docket, and it said Children's Advocacy Center, and I listened as all of these stakeholders in our community said, this is the greatest need that we have in Shasta County. We want to ensure that kids who have experienced some sort of abuse or severe trauma don't have to retell the story of their abuse in really unfriendly settings like the police station or child welfare office.
Right.
And so I just was really inspired and kind of knocked on the one door of the contact that I had at child welfare at the time, Cindy Lane, and said, can I please help? Can I come and take meeting minutes? If there's anything I can do, I know a little bit about nonprofits. And so that's how it started in 2016. We met every month at the DA's office, and 1,000 questions and a whole bunch of design plans, and 5 years later, we opened the doors on our first location on Shasta Street.
Wow. So I used to work with startups a lot, and we had this saying, which is minimum viable products. Like, what's your first thing that you did? So what was the minimum viable product for Children's Legacy Center? What was that one thing that you said, this is our value proposition, this is what we're going to offer to the community, and then you kind of started from there?
Gosh, I love that because I don't think people understand the importance of the very minimum viable product.
Right.
I don't think that they understand the gravity of this one thing. Can we do this one thing well, this one small thing well, and get a win? And so for us, it was an interview center. It was, we want kids to not be re-interviewed multiple times. And so how can we do that? And in doing that, what now has become a nationally accredited Children's Advocacy Center, we have interviewed probably 750, I think, over 750 children and youth.
It's a sad statistic from the North State.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But in doing that, in accomplishing that together with all of these allied agency partners and stakeholders, we realized, gosh, we actually can build something together. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of gets fun because then it becomes what is the next thing that we want to build? Because now we know how to build together.
Right.
So it was that. It was a space. It was a Children's Advocacy Center, which is ultimately a space to ensure that children can come and be interviewed. And down at the other end of the hall, all of the partners come around the table at the same time and are able to feed questions into my staff through an earpiece because they're watching the interview take place live. And it's interesting now because that rhythm and flow it's essentially effortless. I mean, you have investigators that don't remember a world without a Children's Advocacy Center. And we probably spent 6 months going, how are we even going to get everyone to show up at these interviews twice a day, every single day?
Right.
The schedule coordination. And now it's effortless.
And is it kind of like a triage situation where an issue happens, a kid comes in, and you're able to pull someone in 24/7, or is it a more coordinated kind of planned out approach to get everybody there? Because I can't imagine that's a very easy thing to do, to get everybody in the room at the same time. Yeah,
so it's both. I mean, we are able to do acute forensic interviews when necessary. We don't like to because, ultimately for the kiddos, it's not what's best. Mm-hmm. If something is acute and it's just happened and they need some rest, to come in and have to tell the story right then and there is not really best practice. So that's ultimately a decision that's really heavily driven by law enforcement. So typically what will happen is law enforcement will do what's called kind of a minimal facts interview in the field, or child welfare will as well. So what is the lowest threshold of information that they need to gather gather in order to determine, hey, this kiddo needs to come in for an interview. And then we'll get the call from law enforcement or child welfare and get them scheduled pretty quickly, typically sometime that week or the following.
Wow. So how did the funding work early on? How does it work? I mean, what can you tell us about the funding model for that first early version of the Children's Legacy Center?
Yeah, well, we were originally, we were going kind of the typical route of doing, a pretty big capital campaign, and we did a huge feasibility study. We had done the whole thing, and we were about 2 weeks away from our first $1 million ask when the car fire happened.
Wow.
And so, of course, like everyone else, all of our worlds had stopped spinning at that time. And we actually came back together as a board, and I told the board, this was in September, and I told the board, if we need to pause, like we can absolutely pause. And it was actually Chief Moore, and he was our only board member who had lost his home in the car fire. And he said, it's more important now than ever that we continue the work. And so we did. But we really kind of then pivoted to learning grant writing. So grant writing was a whole new world that I didn't really know. We had started to write a couple of grants with the California Office of Emergency Services and have been pretty successful in grant writing now, which we're very grateful for. But by and large, about 73% grant funded, and that's state and federal dollars coming outside of the community in order to get that first building up and running and off the ground. And we still heavily rely on those grants today.
Wow, that's amazing. All right, so recently, again, we look at this world. There's a lot of nonprofits in the North State. We all do a lot of things. Sometimes we duplicate efforts. Sometimes we don't. And there's lanes for a lot of these things. You recently merged with One Safe Place. So Children's Legacy Center and One Safe Place merged to become Arch Collaborative, which to an outsider looking in, it makes a lot of sense. So tell us about how that transition happened and how you were able to kind of honor One Safe Place, which has a really rich legacy in our community. Unfortunately, a need that we've all had for a long time. But tell us about how that kind of merger started to come together.
Yeah, great question. And we're still in the process. So we're actually still in the process of the merger on the back end. So I still have 2 boards of directors. We still have two separate official entities because there's a number of really critical grants with One Safe Place that we have to fully wrap up before we can come together fully as a single agency. But I was able to have the privilege to step into a leadership position at One Safe Place about 2 years ago. And so following the transition of their former executive director, we had a shared board member, Chief Schuler, and he reached out and said, hey, would you mind coming in and just doing an assessment of One Safe Place? And we knew and understood that there were some financial challenges, and COVID pretty heavily impacted OSP. But also, it's such a beloved organization in the community. I mean, I think I've said a million times, One Safe Place really belongs to the community. Mm-hmm. If the Children's Legacy Center belongs to the partners that helped build it, then OSP really belongs to this community. And so the work is obviously so incredibly critical and important. So we stepped in and started to go through the process of just doing an analysis of the nonprofit and realized that financially they were in pretty significant turmoil, in a place of going, okay, we need to relook at some of these grants. How can we potentially maximize the current funding that they have? And also, I think the staff just were in a place of not understanding that they were at risk. And so finding that out was obviously pretty jarring. And so it was about a 2-year process before we officially announced the new kind of name of Arch Collaborative, which was a very exciting moment. But yeah, I think for us, there was really kind of 3 critical pillars. One was just the internal staff and work culture and looking at staff wages, all kinds of things to really ensure that the staff felt adequately supported and trained. The other one was obviously connected to anything finance related, really maximizing their core and current grants, and then revitalizing local partnerships. I mean, through COVID, all of the partners that were on site ultimately had to move off site. Mm-hmm. And so we've been incredibly grateful that we've been able to do that. And as of, probably 2 weeks ago, we had the really incredible news that now that we've secured a couple of additional grants, we can officially, everyone can take a big sigh of relief, deep breath, that they're a viable, sustainable entity. So that feels really good. Also, generosity of our community and donors makes it possible. It's the generosity, especially this time of year, is amazing.
That's awesome. So you merged with One Safe Place just recently. There's still 2 entities. When you started Children's Legacy Center, obviously One Safe Place was there. It was the Shasta Family Justice Center, Shasta Women's Refuge before that. Did you see a lot of duplication when you started CLC? And what did that look like when you started to kind of unpack what was happening at OSP?
Yeah, it was a big kind of misconception, I think, that the community had, that a Shasta Family Justice Center and a Children's Advocacy Center are the same thing. And they're really quite different. There's a lot of things that would seem similar, but they have enough differences between them that really the allied agency partners that were involved in starting the Children's Advocacy Center felt as though it needed to be a standalone nonprofit. Because that was one of the very early questions that we asked is, should this from the get-go merge with an existing nonprofit? And the answer from the beginning was no. However, I think as we grew, understanding, especially when you're getting into the housing space, right? When you're getting into running a domestic violence shelter and a transitional housing program, it is an entirely different world from the world of a Children's Advocacy Center. And so I'm honestly grateful for the way in which we were able to kind of get our feet under us, become a nationally accredited Children's Advocacy Center prior to going through this process of bringing together the two organizations. But yeah, it's now that they serve and support one another, but there's less duplication and overlap than I think one would think.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So you work in a heavy space. One Safe Place worked in a heavy space as well. How do you avoid staff burnout?
Well, I don't know that staff burnout is entirely unavoidable, right? Especially in the line of work that we are in. There's obviously going to be an emphasis on our staff ensuring that they're taking good care of themselves, but more than anything, it's what is the culture that we are creating, and how are we ensuring that there's a culture where the staff have a place to have a safe place to land within their supervision, within the organization, and that they all feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves, of course. Ultimately, I think the way in which we prioritize our staff not burning out is ensuring that we're investing in them well and investing in the culture of the organization and the organization that they work for. So the work itself is naturally, of course, hard, but it's also incredibly inspiring. And the bottom line is that we're not going to entirely avoid staff burnout.
Yeah,
like, it's just not going to happen.
So tell us about the core things that you do in a very simple way. What are the things that Arch Collaborative provides to our community? And just kind of give us like the high level buckets of what those things are now.
Yeah. So, I mean, at its core, we provide immediate crisis type services across a variety of a spectrum for victims of pretty severe, significant crime and trauma and violence. So that is our Children's Advocacy Center, where we do forensic interviews for kiddos that have experienced trauma. We have our 24/7 crisis hotline that receives about 1,000 calls a year from community members needing immediate and urgent support. We provide advocacy responses to the hospital anytime someone is coming to the hospital as a direct result of some form of physical or sexual violence that has happened. We also have our 45-day emergency shelter and our client walk-in services, our crisis intake at the One Safe Place building on Benton, our Sierra Center building. And then we also, now this last year, were able to open up a really incredible 12-unit apartment complex that is where we have also our transitional housing programs. So additionally, on the Children's Legacy Center side, and we're soon to step into this space with One Safe Place, is the clinical work that we do. So it's all of our behavioral health services, our access to psychiatry and med management. And so then that way we can ensure that kids and families that come into our services are able to access the and now we help them heal side of the work.
All right, so you have all this work that you're doing now. What's next? How do we help people? How do you help people heal? And how do we change the system so that we can help these people that are coming out of this? And a bigger question, how do we avoid this altogether?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think, it's interesting timing. I just had a conversation with our board of directors that essentially says, if our mission as an organization is ensuring that we are able to provide a safe place for victims of violent crime, and then we are also then able to get to a place where, and now we help them heal, which is sort of this really critical part, right? In other words, if we're not just doing the crisis work and we really want to do the intentional behavioral health side of the work, there really is a need for systems change ultimately at all levels. And so right now with our organization on the Children's Legacy Center side, our outpatient behavioral health clinic is, of all of our programs, the one that is the most difficult to sustain. And I think it's really critically important from a systems change perspective that there's some fundamental kind of breakdowns that I think we experience, especially that are disproportionately experienced in rural counties compared to some of our larger urban counterparts that operate with a bit of a different access to resources. But let me use a really practical example.
Yeah.
So If we are able to provide, it's our commitment to provide whole family care. So in other words, a child that is referred to our Center for Resilience who has received a forensic interview with us, it's important to us that we not only provide services to that child, but also that child's immediate family, because we know how important that is for that child to really access the healing that they need. However, the reimbursement rates for that child, if we're billing Medi-Cal, is $131 an hour.
And are you able to do that now? Can you bill Medi-Cal
Yeah, we
now?
bill Medi-Cal right now. So the billable rate is $131, which is not a break-even rate. That's a deficit rate, which is that's a whole other conversation. But
that's across the board for Medi-Cal.
Across the board,
services.
it's yes.
Sure.
Now, if we're billing to serve and support that child's family member or parent in a whole family care setting, we get a reimbursement rate of $86 an hour. And so we operate at a deficit that is largely unsustainable long term, right? And so, but at the same time, we understand the importance of whole family care to ultimately facilitate healing. So that's one kind of small example, but this is where rural counties such as Shasta experience the effects of that at a disproportionate way compared to the other counties across the state, because the resources are different.
Right.
And so there really is this need for a look at some of the local and state level kind of systems change effort, which is a part of the work that we've been able to do with our pilot, and we're excited to get to be a part of the conversation.
That's great.
Yeah.
So how does Arch Collaborative fit into the healthcare ecosystem that we have in Shasta County? With like, county has health and human services. We have private. We have Dignity, Shasta Regional Medical Center. There's all these kind of different entities. How do you fit into that world, and where are the gaps that still exist?
Yeah, I mean, well, where are the gaps that still exist feels like something that we need a lot of experts in the room, and we need a thorough analysis to be able to tell us that really effectively and really well. So I don't feel like I can adequately answer that. The things that we do know is that there is really significant wait times to being able to access mental health care, especially psychiatry in particular, substance use treatment as well. All of the things that we know that are being talked about pretty heavily in our community right now, as they should be. For us, where we fit into that is really, we have this like little small space where we just wanted to ensure that the kids that came in through our Children's Advocacy Center would be able to access those therapeutic services. I mean, one, like on a deeply kind of personal level, my kiddos actually needed to access our Children's Advocacy Center services, as you know, this last
tell us
year.
about this.
And it was this really bizarre experience where I walked into my own building and I had my CEO hat was completely off and my mom hat was fully on. And thankfully we were able to get this incredible team from Placer County to come up and actually do the interviews of my kiddos. And but that being said, when we went through the process, we then went, okay, now we want to get my kids plugged into therapy, right?
Yeah.
Like we want them to access some therapeutic services. And through that process, it was probably 25 or 30 plus hours of work to try to get 5 kids plugged into local therapists. They were in 5 different locations. We were not able to get them all in the same place.
Wow.
And 2 of the 5 had some sort of whole family component, whereas the other 3, it was very much like you dropped them off and picked them up. And there wasn't like an integration for us as parents with our kids who had witnessed and experienced something pretty traumatic. And so it was this living, breathing example of why the Center for Resilience, our outpatient clinic, exists. Turns out all my kids can't actually go to my own clinic. It would be a conflict. Yeah. But it was a perfect example. And I think when we try to imagine, just scheduling any normal doctor's appointment, how frustrating that can be, but compound that and you're in a place where you're operating within your brainstem because you've experienced something really traumatic, and how hard it is to try to coordinate and schedule things to help, ultimately, again, to help you heal.
Yeah.
And so this is where, we have to do better. And our case managers and advocates are incredible at that. But there's still massive gaps in the services that are available in our community for sure.
Wow. Are you able to unpack, and I think some of this was in the news, but kind of tell us so the listeners' minds aren't racing, what happened to your kids and your family?
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole big long, that would be a whole podcast in and of itself. Yeah. I mean, there was a pretty significant kind of case of mistaken identity with my kid's dad, and they were a victim of gun violence. And thankfully everyone's
okay.
Everyone's okay. Yeah. My oldest son was struck twice in his arm and has since made a full and complete recovery. But it was this profound experience of going from the side of, I grew up with an ACE score of 0, right? Like it's absolutely not something to joke about, but I have no street cred in the world of severe trauma.
Right.
And then this profoundly traumatic thing happened. And it's interesting now because we look back on that. And of course, my son would not mind me telling this part of the story where when I walked into the ambulance bay, his first words out of his mouth to me were, "I'm not going to therapy." And I'm like, "You are going to so much
sounds
therapy."
Sounds like a young boy. Yeah, that sounds yeah.
So much therapy. And he's such a champion and is more resilient. And my gosh, he's just amazing. And then we were just a part of this process where now I was seeing this thing that I got to be a part of building. I got to see the other side of what it was like as a victim.
Wow.
And I think that the biggest, I think, takeaway for me, there's a lot of them, but one of the most important ones is the number of people that rallied around us was profound. And the majority of the people that we serve don't have that. They don't have a whole community of people to rally around them. And the people who are rallying, it is the child welfare workers, it is the law enforcement officers, it is the prosecutors, it is their victims advocates, right? It's their teachers. Like those are the people that a lot of the kids and families that we serve have in their life because they don't have this incredible community to show up for them. And so I'm gifted and grateful. It's such a gift to be able to have that, to have those people that showed up for us.
Wow,
and
that's amazing.
saw us through.
Unfortunate, but also
extraordinary. All the
nice
things.
to have the silver lining to look back.
Yeah.
So recently this year, you were in the news regarding the Zog File settlement and PG&E and our district attorney Stephanie Bridget. Tell us about how Arch Collaborative was involved in the Zog File settlement, and how do you kind of strike that balance of respecting the victims' families' privacy and the things that they're dealing with, but also how did you get folded into the Zog File settlement?
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said protecting the victim's family's privacy. This is the first time that I'm having a conversation like this one, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to do so. I think there's two things. One, the entirety of the way in which the Zog Fire settlement came about was done with the utmost integrity. It's who DA Bridget is. I fundamentally believe in integrity, and so it was done with the utmost integrity. And so the way in which I think it was portrayed that wasn't the case was difficult and challenging. I found out that the Zog Fire settlement had happened on the news like everyone else did. One of my staff screenshot it to me and said, "Did you know that this was happening?" But I think, circling back to what you just said, our organization was fundamentally founded to protect the stories of victims, right? Like that is what we do. And the Zog settlement and the way in which the narrative was shared in our community put us in this really interesting position because there is never going to be a world in which we will allow the story of a victim to be the Kevlar that protects us as an agency. And I would never speak on behalf of DA Bridget. I would simply say from my experience watching not just DA Bridget, but the DA's office as a whole over the years, they would likely say the same thing. The way in which they protect the stories of the victims, it is a fundamental cornerstone to who we are as an agency. And so every time that the word Zog Fire was said or portrayed for somebody who has actually navigated that, it's incredibly triggering, right? And so although I was incredibly grateful that Fela's grandmother, Susie, who is one of the most strong, extraordinary, inspirational women I've ever had the privilege of sitting in front of. Although I was grateful that she was able to, say, we fully support Kimberly and the Children's Legacy Center. I wish that she had never been put in a position to have to do that, because it's my job to protect victims, not to expose them. So then that way somehow we are protected. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
A story that I think that Fela's grandmother, Susie, would be okay with me telling is when there was kind of some growing conversations that was happening about the frustration of the settlement funds, she and I met. And I remember asking her, like, hey, these are technically unrestricted funds, and we can go about this any way that you would like for us to. We can, we don't have to say anything. We can talk about just the numbers and the structure and what we're doing with the money. We can, how do you want to go about this? And I said, the other option is we can tell the story of Fela. But it's completely your decision. And she said, I want you to tell her story. And so we're very excited about the ability to do that this next year. And it feels like this deeply profound honor, because Fela was not just a normal kiddo. I mean, she was the friend to everyone, whether it was a person or a lizard. And but I think my favorite story, and the thing that has probably impacted me the most in this process, was Fela used to stay the night at her grandparents' house, and Susie would put all of her clothes in the dryer in the morning. So then that way she didn't have to put her feet on the cold floor. She would put all of her clothes in the dryer, and then she would come in and wake her up and have her pull the covers up so her like little bare feet stuck out underneath the covers. And then she would put the warm socks on Fela's feet, and then would let her get dressed in, warm clothes before she ever even got out of bed. And I remember Susie telling this story, and the only thing I kept thinking is every child deserves to be loved that much, right? Every kid deserves that level. That should be the standard at which we hold for what every kid is worthy of in terms of how they are loved and protected and adored. And I've had the privilege of seeing lots of videos and photos, and she was radiant. And so anyway, it was an interesting experience, and we've been grateful for the way in which the community has been supportive of the work that we're doing, and mostly for her family. But we haven't talked about it and didn't talk about it a lot in the beginning just because there was so much noise around it. And there's never a world in which we want to re-victimize a victim.
Right. So how do you honor her legacy moving forward?
Yeah, so we get to tell her story, right? We get to tell her story. We get to talk about how the funds are being used, what we're going to be able to do with Fela's fund. And we're currently in the process. We've got some design plans of a couple of playground options. We actually had the privilege of meeting with the principal of the Igo Ono School and learning a little bit more about her. And we do it with as much intentionality, and intentionality is the right word, as possible.
Yeah, that's great. So where do you see Arch Collaborative in 10 years? What can you share with us? 10 years is a long time. Where do you see Arch Collaborative in 10 years?
I think Arch Collaborative is one of two things in 10 years. It is either an organization that has viable, sustainable crisis intervention services for victims of violent crime. And that core work will forever continue, long after I'm not here anymore. It will continue. That's option A. Option B is we're still doing that core work, no matter what. Option B is, and the one that I'm hopeful for, is that we've had the opportunity to look at all of the things that we have learned for the work that we have done here, and are able to be a thought leader across the state for how rural counties are able to help people heal, and especially after they've navigated the worst thing that they've experienced in their life. And so that's connected to interagency collaboration. That's connected to looking at things like the fact that every county in the state of California is required to have a 24/7 mobile crisis unit, which means 7 counties in California are never going to have that, because Sierra County has a couple thousand people.
Right.
It's not realistic, right? And so looking at some of the ways in which there's these blanket mandates across all 58 counties, and I think that there's some areas where those blanket mandates can set counties up to fail, because if you don't have a mobile crisis unit, then by definition you're failing. But are you? Because some of those counties are the most inspirational, because they have the stories of, we couldn't access a counseling center, and so we set one up in our local library, right?
Yeah.
This is the beauty and the magic that is found in rural Northern California that I'm excited to hopefully continue to get to be a part of that conversation. So that's my hope of where Arch Collaborative goes, is that this core work that we do continues to prioritize and help victims here locally in Shasta County, and that everything that we are learning is able to truly influence regional and state system-wide solutions.
That's great.
Yeah.
So where do we get to a point in Shasta County where we don't need your services as much as you provide them? I mean, where do you see some fundamental breakdown in why we experience high ACE scores in Shasta County? Why we experience people that are experiencing these really negative and terrible traumatic events? I mean, how do we get to a place where we can turn the tide back on some of this stuff and actually help create a healthier community before these issues start to happen?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a straightforward, simple answer that I think everyone gives in terms of why, when you look at a map of the ACEs of the state of California, is Northern California all darker blue, right? Like, why is that? And I don't know that I'm necessarily fully qualified enough to answer that. I know my limits of expertise. Doing like a full in-depth qualitative analysis of it would be fascinating, and I would really love to see those results. But I mean, it's the things that we know in terms of poverty and substance use disorder. There's all of those pieces. But I think when we think about how average everyday citizens interact with our local government, there's typically you're paying your taxes, or there's certainly public safety. Maybe you get a parking ticket or a speeding ticket. You're sending your kids to a local school, which is of course a big one. So it's kind of those typical buckets. There's maybe something with the permitting department, right? Or something's wrong. And I think or something is wrong means you're a victim of a crime, you've committed a crime, or you're living in some sort of really significant poverty. And so we look at some of the counties across Northern California, like Lassen County as an example. 40% of their population lives 200% below the poverty line.
Wow.
Right? And so in this or something is wrong group, the way our system is designed is funding for the most part, this is a generalization, but funding for the most part comes federal, state, county, and down. And so whether that's a direct county service or city service or a direct community-based organization, right? And so the importance of our local government, both in Shasta but also regionally. And, I'm hopeful, and I'm actually inspired, and I'm excited about where we're going. But I think it's going to take all of us, and it's going to take all of us working together, because the rural North State, we need one another. Like we need one another, and we need to have a unified voice here in the North State, because the state of California is looking at 58 counties and major ones like Los Angeles and San Francisco. And so we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but I'm pretty hopeful.
That's great. All right, take yourself back to the early 90s. What was the song?
I'm 6 years old.
Okay. The mid-90s? The mid-90s. Let's go to the mid-90s.
I'm 10.
Yeah, that works. 10
That's
works.
great.
10
Yeah,
works.
I'm 10.
Did you have an iPod? Or I guess that would be the early 2000s.
When I was 10.
I didn't have an iPod either.
No.
What was the song that you were
That was on my CD disc?
from the radio or burning onto?
Yeah.
What was your favorite song?
On Napster.
Yeah, Napster.
That I was like illegally downloading on Napster.
That's right. We all were. With your dial-up, and no one could call the house because you were on internet for 12 hours downloading all these songs. What was the song that was on repeat back then that you were playing?
I feel like anything connected to NSYNC.
Okay.
Anything NSYNC related.
Are you still a JT fan?
I mean, yeah. Like,
okay,
can you not be?
Yeah.
Actually, have you seen the 2015 VMAs collab?
Definitely not. Definitely
okay.
not. I don't know where you're going, but I've not seen it.
Immediately, you have to watch it. It's Chris Stapleton and Justin Timberlake at the 2015
I like Chris
VMAs.
Stapleton.
It will change your life.
Okay.
I have probably watched it, I'm not going to admit how many times, a lot. And it's amazing. I mean, it's like my favorite genre collab, Chris Stapleton, Justin Timberlake.
Chris Stapleton with anybody is amazing.
I'm not kidding. You have to actually watch it.
Okay, I'll watch it.
Tell me what you think.
VMA Lives.
Lives 2015.
Okay.
JT and Chris Stapleton.
So you had NSYNC, Backstreet Boys, 98 Degrees.
Totally.
It was
Billy
all
Ray
JT.
Cyrus, Achy Breaky Heart.
Okay. Well, you did
He
grow up
came
in
to
Texas.
the Texas State Fair one year.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was like at the end of the day, and you've eaten a lot of fried food, so you don't feel very good, but he was there, and I was there, and it was a good moment.
So, tell us, what was some of your other favorite memories from the Texas State Fair? I mean, there's got a lot of fun stuff from back then.
Yeah, and we would go every single year. We would all wear
big
red.
concert? Like for all of
there was
them?
like kind of like smaller ones.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing like huge. But we would go every year with my family. And I mean, my mom and I have a picture eating a candied apple every single year. And I mean, up until she passed away, but we now done it with my kids. And so we have these big red candied apple pictures that is like one of my favorite from the time I was probably 1 until I was, 27.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Texas. Mm-hmm. Are you a Texas barbecue fan?
Yes.
How
question.
would you rate, be honest here, Jason Odell craft barbecue brisket compared to what you've had in Texas? Be honest. It's okay.
I can absolutely, because if you were going to say California barbecue, I was going to say there is no such thing, with the exception of Jason Odell. He would be the exception to the rule. Well, I mean, I think when you compare the entirety of the spread, right? I think like true barbecue people are like, we're just going to look at brisket.
I don't care about the white bread.
This is
I don't
what I'm
care about
saying.
the banana pudding.
You have to care about that.
I don't care about the sides. I just want the meat.
Really?
Yeah. I went to Dallas last year and I had some brisket down there. It was amazing. I had some beef ribs. It was great. But Jason Odell barbecue just hits different. Something about it.
Jason Odell barbecue, the only barbecue that I would hold it up against would be Franklin in Austin.
I did not go to Austin. I went to Dallas.
Other than that, it is probably the best that I've had. But when you take in the entirety of the spread, it is by a mile like favorite meal in Redding. You can't beat it.
No, you can't.
You cannot beat Jason Odell barbecue.
What's the one thing in Texas barbecue that you wish Jason would make? And I'll tell you mine first.
That's a good question. Yeah.
Mine is the banana pudding.
Oh,
I love it.
Yeah.
They don't call it banana pudding. They call it something else.
You literally just said, I don't care about the other things. I just care about the meat. And now you're saying banana pudding.
I want the banana
Todd,
with vanilla wafers. I want the banana with vanilla wafers. That's what I want. The white bread, I don't, the pickles, that's fine.
It's not just white bread. It's like honey rolls. Have you had?
Well, no, Jason Odell's honey rolls are great. But in Texas, they give you like a slice of like Wonder Bread. I'm like, what are you doing here?
You're not supposed to eat that. That's supposed to soak up the stuff.
Oh, see,
that's not supposed to be eaten.
I didn't know that.
Todd.
I didn't eat it. I'd be like, I'm not going to eat this. All right. So
no eating the soggy Wonder Bread.
What's the thing that you wish he would make?
I think it would be just interesting to see Jason Odell try some sort of pie.
Okay.
Right? Like any sort of pie, just
like
because
a pecan, sweet potato.
I don't even care.
Anything.
Ooh, sweet potato pie would be a great plan. Yeah. Because he made lemon bars that changed my life.
Those are good.
And at this point, I'm like, I think that he could make anything. And Southern pie, it's a thing. So any sort of pie from Jason Odell feels like it would be a good idea.
Okay. What else in Texas do you miss that you don't have here besides food?
I grew up in Arlington, which is 20 minutes from Fort Worth and 20 minutes from Dallas, home of the Dallas Cowboys. Yeah, my parents' house was like 10 minutes from the new Cowboys
Jerry
Stadium.
Built.
Yeah. And so you go 20 minutes this direction, and you're in like Cowtown, right?
Yeah.
Which is just all things magical to my soul. And you go 20 minutes in this direction, you're in like downtown Dallas, which is a whole different sort of vibe. So there was some of that kind of part of Texas that I miss. There was also, I think, just sort of the salt of the earth side of, you can call anyone sweetheart and darling and say yes, ma'am, and nobody's going to get upset with you for that. And
where I'm from in Trinity County, I feel like it's the same way. I grew up around a lot of loggers, and I still value them. And we don't have a lot of farmers, and we don't really even have a lot of ranchers in Shasta County. We have some. We have some big ones for sure. But the logging community, that is the salt of the earth for the North State to me.
Yeah.
Like, you're around those people. They work hard. They work their butts off. They get up early. They're out in the woods, but they're just like, they care about what they're doing, and they love what their industry is. And like, once you get sawdust in your veins, that's it.
Have you eaten at the auction yards?
I have never eaten at the auction yards.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, you need to eat at the auction yards.
I feel like I'm a terrible local.
I've been a couple of times and had the privilege to eat at a table with Ellington and Brad. And my gosh, I mean, it's that, right? And that was my dad was born in 1926. He's that generation.
Yeah.
And there's just something about that feels like home.
That's amazing. Yeah. Outside of the space that you live in, where do you see Shasta County in 10 years? What are you hopeful for? And what do you envision for Shasta County outside of the work that you're in right now? What do you want to see?
I think my hope for Shasta County is that the story of our community and its grit and grace and beauty and suffering is able to be shared, because I think it's both honest and inspirational. And what I imagine that looks like for our community is the person in me that was born, I was born in Dallas, Fort Worth, right? I grew up in Texas. And so there's this kind of salt of the earth reality to Shasta County. There's this grit to us as a county that I love and that I hope we forever hang on to. And then there's also innovation. And I think the innovation piece, as long as it can maintain the grit, has a lot of potential to create a community that's going to be able to tell a pretty interesting story one day. And I'm excited about that.
That's
I'm
awesome.
Excited to see where it's going. And gosh, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's beautiful where we live, right? So I'm pretty excited about what the future holds for Northern California.
That's good. The City Builders podcast is brought to you by Obsidian IT. Obsidian IT is a Reading-based, employee-owned technology company providing simple, scalable outsourced IT for your business. Discover how Obsidian cares about IT and give them a call at 530-242-6000 or obsidianit.com. Obsidian keeps us running at the chamber, and we could not do business without them.